The lecture hall on the Galactic Concordance orbital station was cold and silent. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and the faint, metallic scent common to all starfaring species. In neat rows sat the officer cadets, their forms as varied as their homeworlds. Among them, Lee Jun sat perfectly still. Jun was a human male, 26 years old. He had dark hair cut short and watchful eyes. He wore the standard gray cadet uniform like the others. To his left sat Kim Yuna, a human female with a sharp, focused expression. To his right was Choi Miho, who sat straighter than anyone else, his datapad ready. At the front of the hall stood Instructor Voren Keth. He was a Vrail, a species known for their strength and rigid discipline. He stood on two powerful legs, his gray, scaled skin reflecting the light. His forearms were clasped behind his back. "Your final academic module ends now," Voren said, his voice a low rumble from the translator device on his chest. "The practical exercise begins in 6 hours. You will be taken to the surface of Silva 9. You have studied its ecology. You know its dangers." A large holographic display lit up behind him. It showed a lush, green world with towering trees and deep rivers. It looked peaceful. Then the image changed to show a creature with 6 legs and teeth longer than a cadet's hand. "The planet is a Class 8 wilderness," Voren continued. "It is beautiful. It is also hungry. Your goal is simple. Survive the environment. Travel 50 kilometers to the extraction point. Do this within 72 standard hours." A murmur went through the cadets. Some shifted in their seats. Jun did not move. He simply looked at the image of the teeth. "In your packs, you will find a standard energy sidearm, a water purifier, a thermal blanket, and basic rations for 1 day. Voren paused, letting the meaning sink in. 1 day of food for a 3-day journey. You must source the rest from the environment. This is not a test of who can shoot the straightest. This is a test of your will, your mind, your ability to apply doctrine under extreme stress." He walked to the side of the platform. The hologram changed again. It now showed the silhouette of a cadet hiding behind a rock, watching a large predator pass by. "The core doctrine for this exercise is this: blend with the wild." Voren said the words slowly, making sure every cadet heard them. "You are not there to conquer Silva 9. You are not there to wage a war. You are an animal among other animals. You must become part of the ecosystem to survive it." The hologram demonstrated. The cadet silhouette moved only when the wind rustled the leaves. It drank from a stream upstream of where animals drank. It took shelter in a place that offered both protection and escape. Blending means using the terrain as your weapon. It means understanding that the shadow is your friend and noise is your enemy. When a threat finds you, you use your surroundings to create an ambush. You gain the superior position. You then apply controlled, overwhelming force to neutralize the threat. You show the wild that you are not prey. But you must do this from within the wild. You must be part of it. Choi Miho raised his hand. Voren nodded at him. "Instructor, for the ambush doctrine, is the priority the elimination of the threat or the preservation of stealth for continued travel?" "A valid question," Voren said. "The priority is mission success, reaching the extraction point. If you can ambush and eliminate a threat silently, you do so. If you must make noise to ensure a quick kill, you do so, and then you move location immediately. The wild has a short memory for violence, but a long one for vulnerability." Other cadets asked questions. About water sources, about poisonous plants, about the range of their sidearms. Jun listened to each answer, but his face showed no reaction. He looked as if he was remembering something, not learning it. Finally, as the session was coming to an end, Jun raised his hand. It was a slow, calm movement. Voren's yellow eyes found him. "Cadet Lee Jun, speak." Jun's voice was quiet but clear. "Instructor, what if the threat cannot be overwhelmed by available force?" The hall became very quiet. Voren stared at him. "Clarify your question, cadet." Jun met his gaze. "The doctrine says to use overwhelming force. Our available force is 1 sidearm. Limited charge. What if the threat is too many, or too strong, or too fast? What if overwhelming force is not an option? A few cadets glanced at each other. It was a pessimistic question, a doubting question. Miho frowned slightly, as if June had broken a rule. Instructor Vorinketh walked to stand directly in front of June's row. He loomed over the seated humans. Then, Cadet June, he said, his tone cool and sharp. You have failed to blend correctly. You have chosen the wrong ground, the wrong moment, the wrong approach. The wild respects only strength and position. If you have neither, you are food. The doctrine is sound. Your understanding of it is what must be perfected. He held June's gaze for a long moment, challenging him to speak again. June simply gave a small, slow nod. Not an agreement, just an acknowledgement. He had heard the words. Vorin turned back to the whole class. The shuttle leaves in 6 hours. Dismissed. Go and prepare your minds. Remember the doctrine, blend with the wild. Become part of it, and you will survive. The cadets stood and began to file out. Yuna fell into step beside June as they walked into the brighter light of the corridor. He didn't like your question, she said quietly. It was just a question, June replied. It was a question that doubted the lesson, Miho said, joining them from behind. He sounded annoyed. The doctrine is based on millions of data points, June. It works. We just have to execute it. June nodded again. Yes, execution is important. He said nothing else. As they walked to the preparation bay, June looked not at his fellow cadets, nor at the advanced technology around them. He looked out a viewport at the swirling green and blue marble of Silva 9 below. His mind was not on doctrines of controlled force. It was on simpler, older things. The weight of a good stone in the hand. The sound of a branch breaking under a foot that is not your own. The way silence could be the loudest sound of all. He did not seem afraid. He seemed thoughtful, as if he was translating the words, blend with the wild, from one language into another, much older one. The shuttle ride down was a tense and silent affair. The gentle hum of the engines was the only sound. Li Jun felt the pressure change in his ears as they descended. He checked his gear for the 3rd time. 1 energy sidearm, its power cell feeling too light. 1 water purifier. 1 thermal sheet. 1 pack of dry rations. Simple tools. He looked at the other cadets. Kim Yuna was closing her eyes, taking slow breaths. Choi Miho was mouthing the steps of the survival doctrine to himself. The non-human cadets had their own rituals. One tapped its claws on its knee. Another stared blankly at the wall. A voice crackled over the shuttle speaker. It was Instructor Vorinketh. Remember the doctrine. The planet is not your enemy. It is a tool. Use it. Your individual drop coordinates are loaded. The clock starts the moment your feet touch the ground. Good luck. The shuttle did not land. It slowed to a hover over a vast expanse of green jungle. The side door slid open with a hiss. Wind and the smell of damp soil and strange flowers filled the cabin. One by one, a cadet's name was called. A light above them turned green. They stepped to the edge and jumped. A small anti-grav unit on their pack would slow their fall just enough for a safe landing. Then it would detach and fly back to the shuttle. Choi Miho. Miho stood up, his jaw tight. He gave a sharp nod to the others and jumped without hesitation. He disappeared into the green below. Kim Yuna. Yuna opened her eyes. They were clear and focused. She stood, touched June's shoulder briefly for luck, and stepped out into the sky. Li Jun. June stood. He walked to the open door. He did not look down at the jungle. He looked at the horizon, where a large yellow sun was rising. Then he stepped out. The air rushed past him. The anti-grav unit whined, tugging at his shoulders. The canopy rushed up to meet him. He crashed through layers of broad leaves and flexible branches. It was not a gentle landing. He hit the soft, wet ground with a thud, rolling to absorb the impact. The anti-grav unit detached with a click and whizzed back upwards. Silence. It was a deep, living silence, full of chirps, clicks, and distant animal calls. The air was thick and humid. June lay still for a full minute, just listening. He looked up through the hole he had made in the canopy. The sky was a distant patch of blue. He was in a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees with smooth bark. He got to his feet slowly. He checked himself for injury. He was fine. He checked his gear. Everything was there. He oriented himself using the sun and the small compass on his wrist unit. The extraction point was northwest. He started walking. For the first hour, nothing happened. He moved carefully, placing his feet with care to avoid snapping twigs. He drank a little water. He saw strange birds and small, scuttling creatures. He was following the doctrine. He was blending. Then he heard the first sound that did not belong. It was a low hum like a large insect, but it was too steady. It was the sound of a scout skimmer engine. June froze. He melted against the broad trunk of a tree, making his gray uniform blend with the shadows. The hum grew louder. A sleek, black skimmer, no larger than a small vehicle, drifted into view above the trees. It moved slowly. A mounted sensor array on its front swept the ground below. In the seat was a Vrail hunter, one of Instructor Voron's team. This was the real test. The cadets had been told they would be evaluated. They had not been told the instructors would be active hunters. A flash of understanding crossed June's face. This was not just a survival trip. This was a game of cat and mouse. And the cats had skimmers. He watched as the skimmer paused. Its sensors were pointed at a thicket nearby. There was a sudden flash of blue light. A stun beam. A high-pitched yelp echoed through the trees. Then silence. Another cadet, from a different species, had been found and tagged. The skimmer hummed away, moving to search another sector. June remained pressed against the tree for a long time. His mind was working, but not on the doctrine of creating an ambush with overwhelming force. His sidearm could maybe scratch the skimmer's paint. He thought of the sound, the sight lines, the patterns. He began to move again, but his goal changed. He was no longer just walking toward the extraction point. He was studying. He noted where the skimmers seemed to fly the lowest, in the gullies between hills. He noted the places with thick, hanging vines that could tangle in machinery. He saw patches of sticky, sap-like substance oozing from some of the trees. He heard another stun beam in the distance. And another. The hunt was efficient. Later, he found a stream. He needed water. The doctrine said to go upstream, find a quiet spot. He did. As he was filling his canteen, the hum returned. This time, there were two skimmers. They were working together, sweeping the streamline. They had predicted cadets would need water. June did not run. Running created noise and movement. He simply sank down into the cold water, under the overhang of a muddy bank. He held onto a root, his face just above the surface. The skimmers passed directly overhead. He could see the details of their undersides. The sensor arrays passed over the water. He stayed still, his breathing shallow. The skimmers moved on. He pulled himself out, cold and wet. He did not continue along the stream. He moved back into the thickest part of the jungle, where the skimmers would have a hard time flying. He was not just blending with the wild to hide from animals. He was blending to hide from hunters with technology. And he was starting to learn their habits. He thought of Voron's answer. You have failed to blend correctly. June looked at the jungle around him. It was full of forces that could not be overwhelmed. The giant trees, the flooded rivers, the predators with their long teeth. The true wild was not about controlled force. It was about patience. It was about becoming something the hunters did not expect to see. The sun was high now. He was making slow progress on the map. But he was still free. He could hear the distant hum of skimmers, like angry bees, searching for the remaining pieces on the board. One of those pieces was him. He checked his sidearm. Felt useless. He looked at a sharp-edged stone near his foot. He picked it up, tested its weight, and put it in his pocket. Then he moved on, leaving no trail a skimmer could see from above. Kim Yuna was moving like a shadow. She had found a deep, rocky riverbed and was using it as a highway. The sound of the water covered her noise, and the high banks hid her from view. It was smart. It was exactly what the doctrine recommended. She felt a flicker of pride. She was blending. Then she heard the hum. It was close. Too close. She pressed herself into a crevice in the riverbank, her gray uniform coated in wet mud. She held her breath. 2 black scout skimmers slid into view above the river. They moved slowly, sensors scanning the water and the banks. In one sat a Vrail hunter, his 4 arms resting on the controls. The other had a different species, a Trillian, its large eyes scanning methodically. They were talking, their voices carried down by the water's echo. Nothing on thermals here. The water messes with the sensors. The human, Li Jun, his signal is bad. Jumping all over the western ridge. Probably a malfunction. He's hiding in a cave system. The rock disrupts the signal. Vorin wants him found. The human asked a stupid question. Let's see how his theory works in practice. Yuna's eyes widened. They were talking about June. The skimmers began to drift away, following the river downstream. She waited a full 5 minutes before she dared to peek out. The coast was clear. She knew she should go the opposite way, but something made her curious. Cautiously, she began to move upstream, toward where they had mentioned the western ridge. The jungle here was dense, with thick ferns and tangled roots. She moved slowly. Then she heard a new sound. It was the distinct crackle of an energy sidearm set to high stun. It was followed by a shout. A Frau shout came from a small clearing just ahead, off to her left. Yuna crept forward, using a fallen log for cover. She peered over the mossy wood. She saw a small open space. 2 Vrail hunters were on the ground beside their skimmers, which were parked. They had their sidearms drawn. They were staring at a thicket of dense, thorny bushes at the edge of the clearing. "Come out, cadet!" one of them barked. "You are surrounded. Your biosignal is giving you away. You have 10 seconds. Yuna scanned the clearing. Where was June? She couldn't see him. Then she saw a slight movement. It was June. He was not in the thicket. He was on the far side of the clearing, partially hidden behind a large, twisted tree root. He was looking at the hunters, not at the thicket they were aiming at. His own sidearm was still in its holster. In his hand was a rock. One of the hunters fired a warning shot into the thicket. The blue stun beam burned the leaves, making them smoke. At that exact moment, June threw his rock. It was not aimed at the hunters. It flew in a high arc and landed with a loud rustle in the thicket on the opposite side of the clearing from where he stood. Both hunters spun toward the new sound, their weapons following. "Flanking move!" one yelled, and they both fired 2 quick shots into the second thicket. In that second of distraction, June moved. He did not run. He took 3 silent, swift steps and simply slid down a steep, muddy bank into the fast-moving stream below. He disappeared under the brown water. Yuna held her breath. The hunters stopped firing. They approached the first thicket, then the second, using their sensors. They found nothing but scorched plants and a single river stone. "Where is he?" the Vrail growled. "The biosignal. It's fading. It's jumping again. The water must be disrupting it." They ran to the bank and looked down at the stream. The water was muddy and swift. There was no sign of a cadet. They scanned upstream and down. Nothing. "He went in the water. He'll have to come out for air. Fan out. Find where he comes up." The hunters jumped into their skimmers. The vehicles hummed to life and zipped away, one going upstream, one down, following the river's course. The clearing fell silent again, except for the sound of the stream and the smell of burned plants. Yuna waited and waited. She expected to see June's head pop up downstream, gasping for air. A minute passed. 2. Nothing. He did not reemerge. She finally moved from her hiding spot. She went to the bank where he had slipped in. She saw the skid marks in the mud. She looked at the water. It was deep and opaque. He could be anywhere. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. This wasn't hiding. Hiding was waiting in a cave for the hunters to leave. What June had done was different. He had used a sound to misdirect. He had used the hunters' own technology against them, knowing the water would scatter his signal. He had not tried to fight. He had turned himself into a ghost. She looked at the ground near the tree root where he had stood. There were a few other items there, as if he had dropped them from his pack. A packet of official rations, unopened. A standard-issue multi-tool. Things he did not need. He had not just escaped. He had lightened his load. He had left behind concordance gear. Yuna looked back at the stream, then into the deep, dark jungle on the far side. The hunters were searching the riverbanks. They were looking for a cadet trying to breathe. But what if the cadet wasn't trying to breathe where they expected? What if he was already gone, moving in a direction they hadn't considered? She heard the distant, frustrated report over a crackling comms channel one of the hunters must have left open in his rush. Target lost. Biosignal is intermittent. Possible malfunction. Continuing search. Yuna knew it was no malfunction. Li Jun had not broken. He had not been overwhelmed. He had simply changed the game. And now he was gone. She looked at the empty clearing, the confused hunters gone, and the silent, swallowing jungle. For the first time she felt real fear, not of the planet but of the new, unknown rules now in play. She turned and disappeared back into the riverbed, moving faster now. The doctrine no longer felt like a shield. It felt like an old map for a territory that had just changed shape. Kim Yuna moved with a new kind of caution. The riverbed no longer felt safe. The image of June disappearing into the muddy water played over and over in her mind. He hadn't just hidden. He had vanished. The hunters were loud now, their skimmers humming with anger as they crisscrossed the western sectors. They were looking for a malfunctioning biosignal. She was looking for something else. A sign. She left the river and climbed up a steep, rocky slope. The trees here were different, with a sticky, sweet-smelling sap that oozed from their bark. The air was quieter. She needed a place to rest and think. Then she smelled it. Not the jungle smell. The sharp, acrid smell of burnt circuits and hot metal. It was out of place. She followed her nose, moving from tree to tree. She came to the edge of a small, rocky clearing. And she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. In the middle of the clearing lay a Vrail Scout skimmer. It was not parked. It was down. It had landed hard, one of its landing struts bent. But that wasn't what had stopped it. The main intake vent at the rear was clogged with a thick, grayish pulp. It looked like fibers and wet mud had been packed in tightly. The primary sensor array on the front was smeared with a different kind of mud, a dark, almost black substance that had dried in clumps. A few large, broad leaves were stuck to it. There were no marks from energy weapons. No signs of an explosion. The skimmer looked like it had choked on the planet itself. Yuna approached slowly, her own sidearm drawn. The skimmer was empty. The hunter was gone. She checked the cockpit. The controls were dark. The power cell was dead. Hadn't been drained. It had been shut off or something had forced an emergency shutdown when the intakes clogged. She stepped back, her heart pounding. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. Her eyes scanned the ground around the skimmer. Near the treeline she saw it. A loop of woven vine, almost invisible against the leaf litter. It was a snare. It was simple, but the knot was clever and tight. It was placed on a faint game trail. It wasn't meant for a large animal. It was meant for something walking on two legs, something that would put its foot right there. A few steps away, she saw a disturbance in the ground. She carefully brushed away a light covering of leaves and moss. Beneath was a pit. It was not very deep, but the bottom was lined with sharpened stakes made from hard wood. They had been fire-hardened, their points black and sharp. In the center of the pit was a single packet of concordance field rations, untouched. Bait. This was primitive. It was brutal. It was something from an ancient story, not from a galactic concordance survival manual. It used no technology except knowledge. The kind of knowledge that came from understanding pressure and weight and where an enemy would step. A cold realization washed over her. This is June's work. He wasn't trying to reach the extraction point faster than the hunters. He wasn't just hiding from them. He was hunting them. He was using the wild that Instructor Vorin had spoken of, the vines, the mud, the wood, the terrain, but not to hide. He was using it as a weapon. He was turning their own hunt against them. Blend with the wild. The words took on a new, terrifying meaning. Voren meant to use it as a cloak. June was using it as a trap. She heard a noise and ducked behind the down skimmer. A few moments later, a Vrail hunter on foot came into the clearing. It was the one from the skimmer. He looked frustrated. He was carrying a toolkit. He saw his vehicle and growled in anger. He began to scrape the gummy pulp from the intake vent, muttering to himself. Clogged the vent with filth tree pulp and river clay. Overheated the engine. Simple. Stupid. How is that blending? The hunter didn't see the snare. He was focused on his machine. He stepped toward the front of the skimmer to check the sensors, his foot coming down just beside the hidden loop. He missed it by an inch. Yuna watched, frozen. If he had stepped into it, he would have been yanked into the air by his ankle. It wouldn't have killed him, but it would have hurt him. It would have taken him out of the exercise. The hunter finished his quick repair, cleared the main intake, and powered the skimmer up. The engine coughed and then hummed to life. He jumped in, not bothering to check for other traps. The skimmer lifted shakily and sped away, leaving the clearing quiet once more. Yuna stepped out. She looked at the pit, the snare, the broken skimmer. This was a message, a declaration. June was not a cadet being hunted anymore. He was a new kind of predator in the instructor's own game. She thought of his quiet question in the lecture hall. What if the threat cannot be overwhelmed by available force? This was his answer. You do not overwhelm. You undermine. You do not fight the hunter. You spoil his hunt. You use the wild not as a hiding place, but as an ally. She felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the jungle air. The doctrine was wrong. Or it was only a small part of a much bigger, older truth. June understood that truth. The hunters did not. She looked northwest, toward the extraction point. That was the official finish line. Then she looked south, deeper into the wild, where the traps were fresh. That was where the real test was happening. She made a choice. She carefully avoided the snare and the pit. She did not head straight for extraction. She began to move in a wide, careful circle around the area, looking for more signs. She was no longer just a cadet trying to survive. She had become a witness to a lesson that was rewriting itself in real time, written not in manuals, but in mud and vine and sharpened wood. Instructor Voren Keth stood in the mobile command vehicle, a large skimmer hovering high above the jungle. Screens showed maps and the fading biosignals of his cadets. Many were already at the extraction point, tagged and defeated. A few, like Kim Yuna, were still moving. But one signal was a problem. Lee Jun's signal flickered like a dying star. It would appear strong and clear for a few minutes in one location. Then it would vanish, only to pulse weakly from somewhere else a kilometer away. It made no sense. His comms crackled with reports from his hunter team. The frustration in their voices was clear. Hunter 2. Found my skimmer disabled. Vents clogged with organic debris. No sign of the cadet. It was deliberate sabotage. Hunter 4. I have a casualty. Hunter 3 is down. Not from weapons fire. He fell into a concealed pit trap. Wooden stakes. Simulation registers non-lethal injuries. He is out of the exercise. Voren's scaled hands clenched into fists. A pit trap? Was he pursuing the cadet? A pained voice, Hunter 3, came on the channel. No, instructor. I was tracking a biosignal spike. It led me off my patrol path. The ground gave way. It was baited with rations. The command vehicle was silent except for the hum of computers. The other staff, different species, looked at their screens, avoiding Voren's eyes. Hunter 1. I have visual on Cadet Kim Yuna. She is approaching the extraction zone. No engagement requested. Allow her to pass, Voren said, his voice tight. All units, converge on the last known coordinates of Cadet Lee Jun. I want him found. Now, he is no longer a cadet in an exercise. He is a rogue element, a malfunction. But the rules, instructor, a junior officer started. The rules are for cadets. Vorin snapped. He is not behaving as a cadet. He is behaving as an insurgent. He is using unsanctioned, primitive methods to disable equipment and injure personnel. Find him. End this. The hunt changed. The skimmers that had been systematically sweeping the sector now turned like a flock of angry birds and headed for the western ridge. They flew low and fast. They used thermal sensors. They used motion trackers. Below, in the green gloom, Li Jun knew they were coming. He could hear the change in the hum. It was louder, focused, angry. He stood by a tall tree with wide, spade-like leaves. In his hands was a mixture of dark mud and crushed berries. He carefully rubbed it on his face, his neck, his hands. It was not for camouflage from animals. It was to scatter thermal imaging. The berries had a peculiar chemical signature that, he had noticed, made the small native rodents blur on his own wrist scanner. He did not run. Running was for prey. He walked. He moved toward an area of ground that looked solid but was covered with a thick layer of bright green moss. He had tested such an area earlier. Under the moss was deep, sucking mud. He placed a few small, broken branches in a specific pattern near the edge, a pattern that suggested a hiding place just beyond. Then he moved away, circling around. A skimmer arrived minutes later. The hunter saw the broken branches. He saw the pattern. He landed his skimmer on what looked like solid ground at the edge of the green moss. He stepped off, his weapon ready, moving toward the supposed hiding spot. His second step sank into the mud up to his knee. He shouted in surprise, stumbling forward. His other leg plunged in deeper. He was stuck. He struggled, but the more he moved, the deeper he sank. His skimmer sat safely on solid ground, useless to him. He grabbed for his comms. This is Hunter 7. I am immobilized, in a quagmire. It was a deliberate lure. Vorin's roar over the channel was almost deafening. He didn't lay a trap for the skimmer. He laid a trap for you. How are you all falling for this? But they kept falling for it. Another hunter, following a faint trail June had left, walked into a swarm of flying insects that nested in a hollow tree. June had carefully cracked the tree's outer shell with a rock earlier. The insects poured out, angry and stinging. The hunter stumbled back, swatting wildly, his sensors confused by the dense cloud of life forms. Another found his skimmer's cooling fins jammed with sticky sap after he landed to check another false trail. June never fired his energy sidearm. His power cell was still full. He didn't need it. His weapons were the land itself. He used the hunter's own expectations against them. They expected a hiding cadet. He gave them a lure. They expected a trail to follow. He gave them a path that led to danger. They expected to use their technology to see him. He used the jungle to make himself invisible to it. He was not just blending with the wild. He was the wild. He was the confusing heat signature. He was the misleading track. He was the stinging insect and the sucking mud. He was the reason a hunter looked over his shoulder not for an enemy with a gun, but for the ground itself to betray him. In the command vehicle, the reports were chaos. He's not using his weapon. He's using the planet. The biosignal is a ghost. He's leading us in circles. Vorin stared at the map. The extraction point was now mostly full. Kim Yuna had arrived. Choi Miho was there, looking defeated. The exercise was technically concluding, but it was a hollow conclusion. The real story was playing out in the jungle, and he was losing control of it. His perfect doctrine, his lesson in controlled force, was being dismantled by a human with mud on his face and a head full of ancient, quiet ideas. The hunt for Li Jun was no longer a military exercise. It had become a different kind of lesson altogether. One where the instructors were the ones being schooled. The jungle was the classroom, and the quiet human was the only one who understood the real subject. The extraction point was a flat, rocky plateau at the edge of a deep canyon. A large Concordance transport ship sat in the center, its engines a low rumble. Around it stood the cadets who had made it. Some looked proud. Most looked tired and defeated. Kim Yuna stood a little apart, her eyes scanning the jungle tree line. Choi Miho was trying to explain to a fellow cadet how the hunters had superior sensor coverage. Instructor Voron Keth's command skimmer landed with a hard thump. He stepped out, his posture stiff with anger. The usual debriefing atmosphere was gone. The air was tense. He ignored the gathered cadets and marched to the transport's open ramp where the medical and logistics officers stood. "Status," he demanded. A Trillian officer tapped a data slate. "Cadet recovery is at 94%. 6 cadets sustained simulated injuries from fauna. 8 were tagged by the hunter teams. The exercise parameters were met." "Where is Lee Jun?" Voron's voice was cold. The officer hesitated. "Cadet Lee Jun's biosignal remains active. It is steady now, but he is not responding to hails. He is not here." "His location." The officer showed the slate. A bright, steady pulse glowed on the map. It was not near the extraction point. It was deep in a thick, swampy basin 5 kilometers to the south. A place marked as high hazard due to predatory life forms and difficult terrain. "He is not moving. Has he been injured? Compromised by fauna?" The biosignal pattern indicates a conscious, healthy physiology. No distress indicators. Voron stared at the pulse. A healthy, conscious cadet was not at the extraction point. He was sitting in the middle of a swamp. This was not a malfunction. This was an answer. The quiet human's final statement. "Prepare a retrieval team. My skimmer. Now," Voron ordered. "Instructor, the exercise is concluded. The transport is ready to depart. Standard protocol is to remotely deactivate the cadet's biosignal for noncompliance and send an automated drone." Voron turned his yellow eyes on the officer. "No. I will retrieve him myself. I will see this." The flight to the swamp basin was short and silent. 2 other hunter skimmers flanked Voron's. Their weapons powered up. This felt like a military operation now, not a training exercise. They dropped into the humid, misty air of the basin. The biosignal led them to a small, relatively dry hummock of land surrounded by still, dark water and twisted trees. There was a clearing. In the center of the clearing, placed neatly on a flat rock, was a pile of standard-issue concordance gear. The energy sidearm, its power cell still at 98%. The comms unit, the water purifier, the biosignal tag, the thermal blanket, the empty ration pack. It was all there, arranged with a calm precision. Of Lee Jun, there was no sign. The skimmers landed. Voron and 4 hunters stepped out, weapons drawn. They fanned out, sensors sweeping the trees, the water, the air. The biosignal was coming from the tag on the rock. That was all. "Spread out. Find him," Voron hissed, but there was nowhere to hide. The hummock was small. The water around it was deep and murky. The trees offered no cover for a man. It was as if he had dissolved into the mist. Then one of the hunters called out, "Instructor." Here, at the edge of the clearing, under the overhang of a large, fern-covered rock, was a shelter. It was a lean-to, built from straight branches and woven with broad, waterproof leaves. It was small, efficient, and perfectly dry inside. In front of it was a fire pit, dug deep, lined with stones. The ashes were cold. A few fish bones, cleaned, were stacked neatly to one side. Next to the fire pit was a different array of items. A knife fashioned from a sharp flint stone, bound to a handle with vine cord. Several fish hooks made from thorn. A coil of strong, braided vine rope. A container made of woven bark, still holding clean water. This was not a cadet's camp. This was a resident's home. It showed a level of comfort and skill that went far beyond the 72-hour exercise. He hadn't been surviving here. He had been living here. Voron stood in the middle of the clearing, between the pile of rejected technology and the evidence of primal skill. The anger was still in him, but it was now mixed with a cold, dawning understanding. He had been outplayed on a fundamental level. His eyes fell back on the rock with the gear. Something was there he hadn't noticed. A piece of bark, placed on top of the folded uniform shirt. On it, scratched with a sharp point, were words in basic galactic script. Voron walked over and picked it up. The words were simple. They were not a plea, Not a boast, not an explanation. They were a report. Blending complete. The 3 words felt like a physical blow. Vorin looked from the bark to the lean-to, to the useless sensors in his hunter's hands. The doctrine had been followed to a letter. The cadet had blended with the wild. So completely, so utterly, that he had simply stopped being a cadet. He had become part of Silva 9. And in doing so, he had disappeared from their game entirely. "Search the perimeter one more time," Vorin said, his voice hollow now. "Then, retrieve the equipment." "And the cadet, sir?" Vorin looked at the quiet, confident shelter. He looked at the knife of stone and vine. Li Jun was gone. Not lost. Not hiding. He had resigned. He had left their world and entered a different one. One they did not understand and could not control with skimmers and stun beams. "The cadet," Vorin said, the words tasting like ash, "is no longer participating. Mark him as exercise concluded by alternative means." He turned and walked back to his skimmer, the piece of bark still in his hand. The hunters collected the gear, their movements subdued. They left the lean-to and the fire pit exactly as they were. Felt wrong to touch them. They were not Concordance property. They belonged to the wild now. They belonged to the ghost who had taught them a lesson they had not signed up to learn. The transport ship lifted off from the extraction point, leaving the silent, green planet below. But for everyone on board, the exercise was not over. It had just changed shape, leaving behind a quiet, unanswered question in a swamp, written on a piece of bark. The atmosphere in the officers' mess hall on the orbital station was quiet. It was supposed to be a time for relaxed discussion after the exercise. But the usual conversations about tactics and performance were absent. Instead, there was a low hum of uneasy talk. The story of the human cadet who vanished was already spreading, changing shape with each telling. In a corner, Kim Yuna sat with a bowl of soup. She didn't taste it. She was looking at the table where Li Jun usually sat alone. It was empty. Choi Miho sat down across from her. He looked troubled. "They recovered him, 2 days after we left. A silent observation drone finally spotted him. He was just walking. They sent a shuttle down. He went without argument." Yuna nodded. "I heard. They say he was healthy, well-fed. He didn't say anything to the recovery team. Just got on the shuttle." Miho stirred his own soup. "They are calling it an insubordination incident. Vorin is pushing for his removal from the program." "Do you think that's what it was?" Yuna asked, her voice low. "Insubordination." Miho frowned. "He disobeyed the core objective. He didn't reach the extraction point. He cheated. Using traps, disabling instructor equipment. That's not blending. That's sabotage." Yuna thought of the pit, the snare, the skimmer choked with mud. "What is blending, Miho?" "Really? It's in the manual. Using terrain for concealment and tactical advantage to apply force. And if the force you have is useless, what is the terrain for then?" Miho had no answer. He just shook his head. "The doctrine exists for a reason." He broke the rules. Across the room, in a secure briefing chamber, the rules were also being debated. Instructor Vorin Keth stood before a panel of 3 senior observers from the Galactic Concordance. One was a Vrail like him, but older. The other 2 were from different species, known for their strategic minds. A recording played, showing the clearing in the swamp. The neat pile of gear, the lean-to, the words on the bark. "He openly mocked the exercise," Vorin stated, his voice tight. "He abandoned his post. He used prohibited, primitive methods to disable official training assets and simulate injury to instructors. This is not ingenuity. This is a failure of discipline and a rejection of Concordance doctrine. I recommend immediate expulsion." The older Vrail observer, named Kroll, leaned forward. His methods were unorthodox, but they were effective. He evaded your entire hunter team for the duration. By refusing to engage in the exercise, Vorin insisted. "Did he?" asked the second observer, a graceful being with large, dark eyes. Her name was Alara. The directive was blend with the wild to survive. His biosignal confirms he survived. Quite well, in fact. He simply interpreted the wild to include your hunter forces as part of the ecosystem. A logical, if aggressive, extension. It was not the intended lesson, Vorin argued. Perhaps the lesson was insufficient, said the third observer, a blocky being named Gorm. His voice was a slow grind. We teach one way to be a predator. He demonstrated another, an older one. The report says he asked you a question. About overwhelming force. Vorin was silent. It seems, Gorm continued. He found his own answer. One that did not require the force at all. Back in the mess hall, Yuna finally spoke her thought aloud. They taught us to be predators in the wild, she said, more to herself than to Miho. Miho looked at her. What? That's what Vorin's lesson was. How to be the strongest animal. How to take the best spot to ambush to win. She put her spoon down. June didn't do that. He didn't try to be the predator. He didn't try to fight them. So what did he do? Yuna met his gaze, the image of the empty clearing sharp in her mind. He made the hunters afraid of the ground. He made their tools useless. He didn't win a fight. He made the fight pointless. That's how you survive a war that never ends. You don't become the strongest animal. You become the forest. You become the weather. Something that can't be fought. Miho stared at her, his by-the-book understanding struggling with the concept. Felt alien. Felt unfair. Felt deep down terrifyingly effective. In the briefing chamber, the decision was reached. It was a compromise which meant no one was happy. Cadet Lee Jun will not be expelled, Observer Kroll announced. His actions, while disruptive, fell within a broad interpretation of the exercise parameters. He demonstrated exceptional survival aptitude. Vorin's shoulders stiffened. However, Alara added, he will receive a formal note in his record for failure to achieve the stated primary objective. He will be required to undergo remedial training on operational protocols and chain of command. It was a slap on the wrist. A way to save face for the doctrine and for Vorin. But everyone in the room knew the truth. The note in the file was meaningless. The real record was the story now circulating through the fleet. As the meeting ended, Gorm, the blocky observer, lingered. He looked at Vorin. A piece of advice, instructor, he rumbled. Do not be so quick to dismiss the quiet ones who ask about overwhelming force. They are not always afraid. Sometimes they are just measuring. And sometimes they are remembering that the oldest victory is not to crush the enemy, but to make him look at every shadow, doubt every step, and tire of the hunt before it has even begun. That is a different kind of power. One our enemies may have forgotten. It might be good if we remembered it. Vorin said nothing. He left the chamber. The official report was filed. The incident was closed. Lee Jun continued as a cadet, quieter than ever. But nothing was the same. In training exercises, cadets would sometimes share a look if an instructor spoke too confidently about controlling a wilderness. The story of the human who didn't fight, but disappeared and made the hunters hunt shadows, became a quiet legend. Not a story of victory, but of evaporation. A chilling, real-life lesson in a form of warfare the galaxy had, until now, conveniently forgotten. And in the silence between the stars, that lesson waited, patient as stone, ready to be remembered.